Alright, so welcome back again. My name is Jesse, and in this wonderful and exciting tutorial, we're trying to see how to build do a simple end-to-end project using Kubernetes, right? So we're trying to see how to do an end-to-end project, which is DevOps, in which we try and build a simple application, and then we will package the application using Podman or Docker, and then we are going to deploy it on Kubernetes, right? So the idea is that we want to see how to start a single project and then move throughout the whole procedure. So why would we want to use Kubernetes, or why we want to use Docker or any of these services? So in most cases, when you're designing an application, you may start with a very simple application, but with time it becomes very huge, and then you may need different services, right? You have to break it down. So you may have a front end, and then you may also have a backend, a REST API, a GraphQL API based on what the people need. Maybe you also want to create another version for your API. So let's say REST API version 1 with a different framework. And you also have your database and your Redis, right? So all these different systems may be useful for running your application, right? So you have your front end that talks to your backend, which has some APIs, whether it's GraphQL or REST API, and the rest. In most cases, one of the ways of making it simple is to containerize these applications, right? So that you can easily scale them up, so that you don't need to have one monolithic service, right? So you create simple services, microservices, and then you combine them together. But in doing so, you do them and then you containerize them. But it can be very difficult to manage and then control everything. So that is where we go with Kubernetes, right? So Kubernetes is a simple way in which we try to manage different services, different containers, right, in a very simple way without a lot of difficulty. You can also use Docker Swarm, Docker Compose, Mesosphere, and all of them, but Kubernetes is a very simple way to allow us to manage all your different containers, right? So let's start with it. So I'm just going to go back again to our workspace here, and then, so as I said, we use Kubernetes to enable us to manage and then orchestrate all the different containers that we have, and it works with this, right? So Kubernetes is what we use to do the management, but you may need to create your own cluster, right? So simply a cluster is simply a collection of virtual machines, right? Doesn't mean a cluster in English is group or a collection. So it's just a collection of virtual machines, and then to establish or create your own VM on your system, to create your own Kubernetes cluster, there are several tools you can use to practice locally. So one of them is Minikube, and then there is also Microk8s. So in this tutorial, I'm using Microk8s, which is going to be a very simple way of creating clusters locally in your system to be able to learn about Kubernetes. Okay, and there is also kubectl, which is a simple CLI that will allow you to be able to interact with your cluster, right, your Kubernetes cluster. So what do we mean by a cluster? A cluster is simply a collection of right, of VMs, right? And within a cluster, we have two main things. We have a master node and then a worker node. So the master node is simply the chief, right, the boss, or the one that is going to decide everything. So sometimes it's called the control plane. So the master node is the one going to control and decide everything that we will need. So in case you want to do something, you have different services, different containers you want to run. Your master node is the one that is going to control all of them, right? It has different components. So it has the API server that is going to be handling all communications in the cluster and outside the cluster. We have the scheduler that is going to be used to decide where to place or the placement of pods. We go into the details of what a pod is. We also have the control manager that is going to manage all the deployments and then all the replicas, because the idea is that with a microservice, in case you want to have a different version, or you want to expand your database or expand maybe the backend or something, you will need to scale it up or down. It is very easy with creating replicas, right? Or in case it goes down, you can quickly roll back whatever that was there. That's where replica comes inside, right? Just like a clone. And then we also have the etcd. So etcd is a distributed database, right? That is used to store the cluster state so that we know where it was, right? So as I said, within a cluster, we have two main components. We have the master node as like the chief, the one designing everything. So if you're coming from Apache Spark, there's also similar idea in which you have the master, and we also have the worker nodes, right? So in which the master decides everything, or the driver node, and then whatever is supposed to be run, whatever activity that is supposed to be done, is done by the worker nodes. So in Kubernetes, we have worker nodes, and within the worker nodes, that is where we run our pod. So a pod is simply a wrapper around the container. So instead of containerizing it just like in Docker, you just don't just have your container, you just have the container, and then you place the container within another wrapper called a pod. And the idea is that with a pod, you have a simple IP assigned to everything within the pod, right? Which is very easy to work with. So all the containers, so a pod can have just one container or multiple containers, and then they may share some resources, which is very useful. So every pod will have its own IP, and then that IP will be shared. So in case you want to connect or talk with one another, you go through a service, right? And then there's also ingress, which allows you to talk outside. So this is just a simple overview of cluster, right? So just understand that a cluster is just a collection of VM, right? And then it contains a master node that is the boss that's going to decide what to do, and then the worker node that's going to actually do or run the application, and it runs it inside a pod. A pod is simply a wrapper around a container, right? So you have, let's say, ships, and then inside the ship there is a container, right? In the container we have cars, whatever thing you have, maybe your car inside the container, and then the pod is just like the container within a ship, right? Something like that. Okay, so let's see how to start with our project, right? And we want to do this simple project locally. So you may not see the point now, but with time you get to know why we may need Kubernetes to do all of these things. So let's start with this. So we build a simple application from scratch, and then we move on from here. So let's start here. So first I'll go back again to my workspace, which is here, as you can see, and then I'm going to create my directory. Let's call it as my app. I'll call it as my core. You can just give it any name. You can give it any particular name that you want, but let's call it as app stack, right? Then I'll move into app stack, which is where I'll be running everything. I'm going to create a virtual environment, and I'm going to call it as Django, right? You are using Django to build a simple API. Then later on you deploy it. So let's activate it. Script activate, then pip install Django, and then you'll be using Django Ninja for today. So this is going to install Django and then Django Ninja, and then we will start writing some code. Perfect. So it's taking some time. So as it takes some time, apologies for how long this tutorial is going to be. I may not edit it. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so let's start. Come back here, and now let's pip, right? I'm just going to first of all create a requirement for whatever I'm going, but before I do that, let's move into the application, right? And I can just simply create a Django project. So Django admin, then let's call it as core project. Yeah, it's supposed to be admin start project, right? And then I'll move into my start project, my core project that I've created. If I go back here, you can see we have my manager.py. So this is what I'll be using to run all the application. Then let's create a project. So start up, and I'm going to call it as hospitals, right? Yeah, I'll call it as hospitals. Yeah, that's the name of the application. So you can just give it any name, but I want to call it as hospitals because I'm building a service that have different apps, right? So hospitals. Then I'll move into the same location. So let's open it with VS Code, and then once I've opened it with VS Code, as you can see from here, you will start writing some code. So if I go back here, I'll just see my views here, right? That talks about where I'll put my index and stuff. So first I'll go to my main project, and I need to add the application itself, right? The simple app I created. So I'll go back here. Now I'll call it as my local app, right? So this is going to be my local app, which I'll call it as my hospitals, right? Perfect. That is it. That's what I need. And I'll come back to my URLs, and then I will import include. Then from here, I can just go with my path. Then I'll just go straight away to include. Then I include my hospitals, right? .url. And I need to create this hospital.url inside my core app here. So I'll come back again to my close from here. Inside here we have nothing, so I have to create these URLs there. So I'll create it here with urls.py, and then I will just copy this. I always do this to make it easy for everybody. Yep. And then let's take off this. Okay, perfect. So this is going to be our simple application that we are building, and then let's just create something very simple. So views.index, I'll give it a name and I'll call it as home, right? And I need to import views, so from .import views, and then I'll close this and I'll go back to my views location here, and I'm going to create my simple application. So def index takes in the request, and then I will just create a context which would take in, let's say, the page title, which in this case is going to be, let's say, hospitals, right? Then return render. I'll pass in my request first, then I'll also create a simple index.html and I'll pass in my context. I need to create a directory that has this index.html. So in the same location as my app right here, I'll just create a directory called template. Then inside my template, I'll create my index.html file. Then let's go with HTML5, and then I'm going to change this one here to use the page title, and let's call it as hospitals, right? Whatever. So this page title is coming from here, and then I can just, yeah, let's leave it like that. Let's call it as abstract, right? Something like that. And then I'll just create a simple div with an h2 tag. Then let's pass in the page title here. Perfect. So let's see if all that you have done will work. So I'll go back here to the same location as my app is working. So let's position it side by side, and I can use my terminal from here. Let's go to a new terminal. Right, it is not running the VM, so I'll just switch to command prompt, and then the VM has been activated. So as you can see, I'm inside my manage.py. Now I can just clear off this. So Python manage.py run server, right? If I run server, is I just listen on this particular port, so I can just copy this port and then paste it inside my browser. You can see that the application is working as we expect it to be. Right, so the application works as we expect it to be. Perfect. Right, so that application is working as expected. Now, how do we, let me make it bigger. Okay, I made it too big. Apologies for that. Okay, now how do we, the application is working, so let's build the API, right? So because it's an API, so since everything is working, I'll go back to my models and I'm going to create my simple model. I'll go as class hospital, right? And then models.model. Then I'll just specify the various things for this particular model, right? So based on the data that we have, we want to build some structure. So what I'll do is that I will save us time, and then let's have it here. So we have, within the hospital, we have facility, the district, the hospital name, and then the website, and then the city or town, right? Perfect. And then I also come back again and add it to my admin. So let's import it. So from dot models, import hospital, and then I'll call it as admin dot site register. This I do so that I can see it in my admin tab, right? Perfect. So as you are seeing here, I have to run migrate to be able to create the migration files, and you can see that there is no migration here. So what I'll do is that I'll open another tab. So let's go back again and create another tab, and let's switch this tab from here to command prompt. Then I can run Python manage.py, then make migrations. So if I run it, it's going to create a migration file. And as you can see, this is my migration file that talks about how to create my model, right? So create a model, the name hospital, with all the various things that we need. Let me bring this down here. Perfect. So let's migrate. So let's clear off this, and then we can just do Python manage.py migrate. It's going to migrate all the things that we need. Perfect. So we are done with it. We are done with the model structure. What we need is, we also need to create a schema for our model. So I'll call it as my schemas, right? .py. And since we are using Ninja API, we just go straight away and then import. So from Ninja, right, we need to use, we are using Ninja to help us with our activity. So it's going to be, let's ensure that we have installed Ninja. I go back here, pip install Django Ninja, right? So I already have it. So now I can just go back again to my app here. So Ninja, then I can import my schema, and then my model schema, right? So Ninja API is very simple, just like Django REST API, but with Ninja you can just do a lot of things, right? So we can also have something similar to model serializer in case you are coming from Django REST framework, right? You can just use the model serializer to create a simple serializer. So in that case, it's going to be something like this. We will have our, right? You have the hospital schema, then you pass in model schema, and then you can just pass in your model. So from dot models import my hospital, right? So in this case, it will automatically use the field name to create it, which is similar to model serializer. Right? So I don't need this schema. Perfect. Now, how do we create our API? So I'll come back again to my same file here, and let's create the API. So api.py, then I'm going to create our Ninja API. So from Ninja, import Ninja, right? So we're using Ninja API to create our simple API. So it's Ninja API. Then I need to specify, yeah, this is okay. Then the first thing that I need to initialize my app is going to be Ninja API. Then here I can pass in the title that I want. So let's call it as the same hospitals API. Then you can also give a version. Then let's give it as the same version 1.0.0. Perfect, right? So once you initialize this app, this is what we're going to use to build our route, right? So let's build our first route. So we can just do the simple create, read, update, delete, but let's go straight away with just read, right? So we can just do a simple CRUD API, but we just go straight away with CRUD API or CRUDA API, right? Yeah, so CRUD API, create, read, update, delete, CRUDA, create, read, update, delete, download, and then download, upload, and then authenticate, right? Which is very important. So let's see I'll just go back again, and then let's create a simple one for reading the hospitals. Right, so we're going to read a hospital or get a hospital, and I will pass in my request, and I need to pass in my schema, right? So you need hospital ID, then this is going to be an integer, right? It's going to be a simple integer. So this is a simple way of creating it. So this one here, and now I can just use Django. So hospitals going to be, so get object or 44 from Django, then I'll pass in my hospital model, and I'll pass in the hospital ID. So my ID is going to be my hospital ID. So I need to import this get object of 44 from Django dot I think it's dot shortcut import get object of 44, right? So that's what they're using, but we need to specify this is how to get it, and then we can now return whatever that we have. So I want to return the ID, and then I can return the hospital right dot ID, right? So this is in case I want to return one, but in case I want to return everything, I can just return it as this. But the nice thing about Ninja is that with the schema, we can now serialize and deserialize our data, right? So we will now create our endpoint, and this is going to be my app dot, this is a get endpoint. I'll give it as my hospital, right? And then this will take in the ID, the hospital ID, and then I can specify my response. So the response is going to be my schema. So hospital schema. So this hospital schema is coming from here. So we have our schemas here. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'll come back here from dot schema, import hospital schema. Perfect, right? And I also need to import the hospital. So from dot models, import my hospital, right? So this is going to create our simple list in which we can just get the ID and fetch it all. But in case I want to get all, to read all, I'll just copy this. See what's time. I want to read all of them. What I will do is that I'll just take off this hospitals without this, and then because I want to read all, I'll just have to pass it inside a list, and then this will be here, right? So this is how the response is going to be. And since I'm using a list, I need to import it from typing. So from typing, import list, right? And how do I get it? I don't need this because I'm just getting everything. And in case I want to get every hospital, right, from my data, all I need is hospitals dot object dot get, right, all dot all. And then this will be called hospitals, and this is being passed here as hospitals, right? And let's change this one from, so list hospitals, right? So you have two endpoints, one to search per ID, one to search per to get all of them. We can also create another endpoint which will be like this, right? And the endpoint is that we will have, instead of using an ID, we want to have a search option. Right, notice I brought a question mark, not a question mark, but I brought another exclamation because this is also similar, right? And then I would want to pass in a query. So the query is going to be a string, right? And then I can now, instead of doing this option here, I want to find hospitals that match a particular pattern. So hospital.object.all, or let's use filter. Then I want to filter by the two options. So I want to either search by the name of the hospital or not, right? So but let's see if everything is working, right? So I'll go back again. So since everything is working, I'll come back to my close of models, ninada. What? I'll come back here to the URLs, and then inside my URLs, I'm just going to import my app API, right? I want to import my app. So that is very important. And sometimes you have to be careful with this option here, right? You have to do it in this way. So this app here is coming from the app here, which we initialized, this one, right? And then now I can just create another route for this. It's my API, and this will be /API, or let's go API / then this will take in my apps.url, right? It's supposed to be called this, right? This is by convention, otherwise it will not work. Now let's see if it's going to work. So if I refresh, everything is working as expected. Now if I go back here to API, so that was the name we gave, so API and docs. Now I have my hospitals API, right? Perfect, as you can see. So I can make it like this so that I can see it better, right? So everything is working, but there is no data. If I click on this, we don't have data. Let's give kind of data, right? Alice, no, right? So how do we fill it with data? So I have my data and I want to populate my data. So let me show you an example of the data that I have. So I was building some apps somewhere. Maybe you can check it out later. I want to use the same app. I may not give out that data, sorry. Yeah, it will be available maybe. And this is a sample app I was building. So I just want to use this same data for the application you are building. Yeah, you can see everything that I have. So let's go back to so many things here. Let's go to JCloud, and then my End2End, and then I'll paste in my data here, right? So inside the same location as my managed part, I'm going to paste in this data here, right? And as you can see, if I should open this data, if I open it here, not my database, but here, you can see that we have the facility, district, hospital website, and this is JSON, so we can load it in JSON and then read it, right? Okay, so how do we do that? So we can simply simplify it by creating a management command. So I'll come back again to my app. Then inside this place, I'm going to create a directory. I'm going to call it as management. Then inside management, I'll create a file to make it a package. So init.py. Then I'll create another directory called commands, right? And then within the commands, I'll create two files because it's a package init _ py, and then import hospitals, right? Data, or we can just call this py. Perfect. So this is how to create a management file to allow you to be able to import data. Okay, so how do we import the data? So like, since it's JSON, we can simply create a command. I will copy to save us time, and I'll explain the code. Okay, so what you are doing is that we would want to import some data here, right? And how do we do that? So we just import JSON because our data is JSON, and then we are importing these ones from Django. So this is going to help us get the model we want to put the data there. And then I created a class command which we are inheriting from base command, and then we created an argument to specify the path because we want to be able to do something like this. And I specified the default as this name, right, which is the name of the file, and we can call it as import hospitals data, right? So this should match up with the name of the file, right? Otherwise it will not work. Perfect. And now we created a handle function in which we get the path, then we get a model that we are working on from the application. So this is the application and this is the model from our models directory here, right? And then we are just opening the file, then going to load our file, our JSON file, and then create our data, right? Perfect. So that is it. So let's save it. And now if I save it and I come back here, I do Python manage.py. If I go with help, you see that we have the import data there. All right, so we have these commands. So this is how some of these commands were made. So we have my hospitals, that's the name of the app, then import hospitals data. So because I have it there, I can now do manage, then import hospitals data. Then I can specify the path, which is my Ghana. Yeah, I call it Ghana because that's the name of it. Then now it's going to import it. So you see that now there's nothing here. It was empty, no. Now it has finished importing. If I execute again, now we have no data. Funny how it's not working. So I'll go back again to the application, to the API, and let's check. Right, so I come back here. Then we have this one here. So this was the schema that we have it. We are returning the schema. So we have to don't return the schema, we have to return the hospitals. If I run it now, so it's going to I'm returning the hospital, but it will pass through the schema and then to be serialized. So if I come back here, so now because I passed in the schema, it was null. But if I go back again and I execute, now we have all the data there, right? So all the data is there. Perfect. Cool. And I can also go back again and specify an ID in case there's an ID. If I go with, let's say, number 1, execute, we have some data there, right? Perfect. So our API is working. Now, how do we add another feature? So I want to add another option in which we can search. Right, so what I want to do is that I want to have something like this. So we have my endpoints, something like this. So hospitals, then search, right? And then I can do my query. Then I can pass in, let's say, the name of the hospital, right? So name of hospital, or maybe a city, right? So I want to just do 2. So how do we do that? So we can use, because I can do all, right? You can just come back here, then go it from Django.models.db.models. We just go with db import models, right? So this allows you to get the models, and then with the model we can just create a kill option, right? Use the kill for kill expression to allow us to be able to do all, right? So it's going to be my models.kill, right? So I can either pick the hospital, so hospital's name. So we have the hospital name field, which if you go back here and you check, we had the hospital name. So we want to get the hospital name, and then we will say if I contains, right, the particular term we search for. There's one, and since I'm using kill, I can just go with all. The same thing, I can just repeat this. Let me expand it. Now I can repeat this. So either the term contains this or it contains another stuff, right? So either it contains the hospital name, either search through the hospital name or search through the city or town, right? So what you are doing is that you are searching either through this field here or this field, right? Which is very useful. So let's save it, and now we can return my hospitals, and this is going to be in the format of a list because we can have multiple stuff. So this can be list because it can be multiple. Let's save it. So let's go back again and check the endpoint. So I'll refresh my app. Now we have the search query, and automatically you can see that we have the query field. That's the nice thing about Django Ninja, right? You don't need to get another framework like in, yeah. So let's see. So if I search for a country, a hospital like Kumasi, right? Kumasi is where my parents are from. That's where I was born anyway. So it's going, it's looking through it. Hopefully there is no errors. So let's go back again and check. Yeah, there is giving us an error here, right? So hospital API read is already used. So you see, the reason we are having this error is sometimes if the endpoint has a similar, it becomes a problem, right? So that's why it's failing. So what I will do is that I will, this is correct filter. Yeah. So the reason it's failing is that we only are returning, we should convert it into a list here. So I'll convert this to a list. So let's save it. Now let's refresh. Let's go back to the query. Let's pass in Kumasi or Accra. I'm surprised it's taking so long, right? Saying hospitals is already in use. Okay, I think the issue, now you can see the reason, right? The reason is this function is being declared twice, so we need to change it and call it, let's say, search hospitals, right? And this will work, right? Because it was given twice to function, so it was failing. So let's cancel. Let's refresh. Close this. Create. Then you have issue. So let's say Kumasi or Kumasi ili Accra. Now what? You can see it here, right? So all is here. Okay, so our application is working. We have been able to build a simple application. You can write a unit test for it, but you have been able to build a simple application for the Django part. Now let's see how to containerize this application, right? We want to containerize it here, and then from there we will move on to the next step. So let's do that in the next session. Stay blessed. Bye.